You can carry someone's house on your back for years without them ever knowing you're the one holding it up. My name is Claire Hendricks. I'm 37 now, and it took me half a decade to understand that saving people and letting them destroy you are not the same act of love. Welcome back. This is a story about foundations, the kind nobody sees until they crack. If you've ever been the capable one in a family that mistakes your strength for coldness, you already know how this feels. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, and if stories about boundaries and the long math of loyalty mean something to you, subscribe. Let's begin. It was late morning on Memorial Day when I pulled into my office parking lot instead of heading to my uncle's ranch. The rosewood CPA plate on my door caught the light. 12 years I'd been building this practice. Tax returns for dairy farmers, payroll for the feed store, last-minute panic calls from people who'd gotten letters with red borders. That morning, it was George Callahan, 71, third-generation cattle rancher. He'd miscategorized a land lease and the state wanted $11,000 he didn't have by Friday. I found the exemption clause, filed the amended return, brought it down to $400. George's voice broke on the phone when I told him. I say this not to sound noble. I say it so you understand. I know how to read the space between what people say and what the numbers tell you they're hiding. And that skill, quiet, specific, a little bit ruthless, was about to crack my own family open. I had circled Memorial Day on my calendar weeks ago. 43 miles to the ranch, my uncle's annual gathering, brisket and cold beer and the long wooden table under the cottonwoods where 3 generations of my mother's family had made toasts and told the same 6 stories. My mother had been gone 3 years. I told myself every year I wouldn't go. And every year I went, because she would have wanted me there, because I'd made her a promise I hadn't kept yet, and because I had unfinished business with that property that no one at the table knew existed. I picked up my keys. I thought, maybe this year will be different. I was right, just not in any way I could have predicted. The drive to Ashford County hasn't changed in my lifetime. 2-lane blacktop, then caliche, then the cattle guard that rattles your teeth, and finally the long gravel drive flanked by cenizo bushes my grandfather planted in 1968. The Callaway Ranch, 112 acres, a barn with a roof my uncle keeps meaning to replace, the ranch house where my mother was born in a back bedroom with no air conditioning and a midwife who smoked Salems. There's a mesquite tree in the side yard she planted the summer she turned 16. She used to say a family is like that tree, you can't see most of what keeps it alive. I came around the last curve and there it was. American flags on the fence posts, trucks parked in the clearing, smoke rolling thick and sweet off 2 drum grills. To anyone passing, it looked like the best day of the year. I parked at the far end, away from everyone. The way you park when part of you is always measuring the distance to the exit. I sat there with the engine ticking. Through the windshield I could see my cousin Jackson laughing, one arm slung over a fence post, 39, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who fills a room just by leaning against something. He looked like he owned the place. Technically, he didn't, not yet. I checked my bag. The metal lockbox was still there. I'd put it in that morning without letting myself think too hard about why. I'd been carrying that box in my car for 18 months. Today was the day I was bringing it back to the place it came from. I didn't know yet that by sunset, every person at that table would finally understand what it meant. Jackson greeted people at the gate like a mayor. He shook hands, clapped shoulders, pointed folks toward the cooler with the easy authority of a man who believes the ground beneath him will never move. His wife Natalie worked the other side of the crowd, refilling glasses, laughing too loud, saying things just within earshot. So good to see the family who actually shows up. She smiled at me when she said it. That's the thing about cruelty in families, it almost always comes with a smile. My Aunt Diane sat in the shade like a sphinx, 74, thin-lipped, the kind of woman who can make you feel judged just by the way she holds her iced tea. When she saw me, her mouth tightened. Not a greeting, an assessment. My Uncle Ray stood near the head of the table, 76 and still tall, sunburned, handsome in the way ranchers stay handsome, lean and wind-worn and unbending. He gave me a nod so small it might have been a twitch. I nodded back. Hello to you too, Uncle Ray. I carried a foil-covered dish to the table because that's what you do with your hands when no one offers you a seat. And I watched. That's my real profession, watching where things don't add up. And something here didn't. Jackson leaned down close to my uncle's ear, said something low. My uncle listened, then nodded, slow and serious, the way you nod when you've already half-decided something and you're just waiting for permission to finish. Natalie saw it too. She glanced at me, then away. Whatever Jackson was selling that afternoon, my uncle was buying. I just didn't know yet what it cost. You don't become the outsider overnight. It takes years, one bad season, a room full of frightened people, And one person willing to ask the wrong questions. 3 years ago, my mother was dying in the front bedroom of that ranch house. And the ranch was dying with her. I knew because I'm the only one in the family who can read a balance sheet without needing someone to explain it twice. The property taxes were 4 months behind, the operating loan was worse, and Jackson had a plan. He stood at the foot of my mother's hospice bed and pitched an investment, a buddy of his, commercial development opportunity just outside Fredericksburg. All we needed was for Uncle Ray to pull equity out of the ranch to get in on the ground floor. I asked questions. Who was the developer? Where was the contract? What happened to the 112 acres if the deal went sideways? Jackson looked at me like I'd spit on the floor. Mom is dying right here, Claire, and all you care about is paperwork? I'd brought a folder. I'd spent 2 nights building a simple financial model, best case, worst case, what it would cost the ranch if the deal collapsed. I held it out to my uncle. He took it, looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, set it face down on the nightstand. We don't need your spreadsheets, Claire, we need faith. And there it was. The line that separated me from the rest of them, clean as a fence post. I had brought math to a deathbed. To this family, that was the same as bringing nothing. Here's something nobody tells you about being cast out. You still keep showing up. 18 months ago, I drove out to check on my uncle. It was January, he wasn't answering his phone. He let me in, gruff, distracted, and went back to his recliner. I made coffee in the kitchen where I used to make coffee as a kid. And while the pot brewed, I saw it. A stack of mail shoved under a week-old newspaper. The top envelope had a bank's logo in the corner, a red line of text across the front. Final notice. I didn't touch it. I'd like to say I respected his privacy. The truth is I already knew what it was. You don't spend 12 years cleaning up other people's financial disasters without recognizing one in your own uncle's kitchen. Brought him his coffee, careful, calm. Uncle Ray, if the ranch is in trouble, I can look at it, no charge, just let me help. He didn't even look up. Ranch is fine, Jackson and I handled it. Though we landed exactly where it always did. On the son who stayed, and the niece who counted things. I left. But I sat in my truck at the end of that driveway for a long time. Because a man who's handled it doesn't hide a final notice under the Sunday paper. A man who's handled it doesn't need to lie to his own family. Something was very wrong with the ranch. And my uncle would rather lose it than let me see the numbers. Back at the party, I stood near the drink table with a paper plate I wasn't eating from. There's a particular loneliness that comes from being surrounded by your own blood and still feeling like a stranger. A second cousin's kid looked up at me, maybe 6 years old. Who are you? I'm your cousin Claire. He blinked, shrugged, ran off. I looked for my mother out of instinct. She'd be at the grill, bossing my uncle, sneaking the first slice of brisket. 3 years gone and the yard still had a shape where she used to be. I want to be clear about something. I didn't drive out there hoping they'd love me. I was done hoping for that. I came because I'd made my mother a promise, and because there was one thing left I needed to set right. Memorial Day felt like the right day to do it. I touched my bag, felt the hard corner of the lockbox through the canvas. Some decisions don't feel like decisions. They feel like a season finally turning. I had carried this family quietly for 18 months. I had let them call me cold, difficult, the one who didn't understand what family meant. And today, quietly, that was going to end. I just had to survive the toasts first. The Ramirez family came over around 4. They'd ranched the adjacent property for 40 years, good people, the kind who show up when your fence goes down in a storm. Carlos Ramirez shook my uncle's hand and said the place looked beautiful. My uncle lit up. He put his arm around Jackson, gestured wide toward the barn, the pasture, the hills going purple in the distance. This land's been Callaway land since my father cleared it, and it's staying Callaway land. He squeezed Jackson's shoulder. 4th generation right here, we've got it all planned out. Jackson ducked his head, modest, humble. Natalie beamed. Aunt Diane dabbed at her eyes like she was watching something sacred. I stood 12 feet away, holding a plate I hadn't touched. And I felt something strange. Not anger. Something colder. Because I knew what that ranch was worth, down to the penny. I knew who held the lien on it. And it wasn't the man making the speech. The development deal collapsed. Of course it did. Jackson's buddy took the money and vanished before the bulldozers ever showed up. My mother died that April, and the family needed someone to blame who wasn't grief and wasn't a man they'd never see again. So they blamed me. At the funeral, Aunt Diane told half the county that Claire cared more about numbers than her own mother. Jackson stood by the casket with his hand over his heart, the golden boy, The one who tried to save the ranch while his cousin sat at home with her calculator. He cried beautifully. I let them have the story. Because correcting it at my mother's graveside would have made me exactly the cold thing they said I was. Here's what none of them ever learned. My mother spent her last 9 weeks in a hospital bed at home, with a nurse 4 days a week, and the morphine pump that insurance companies fight you on. Someone paid for that. Not my uncle, who had nothing left but pride and a mortgage. Not Jackson, who was busy chasing money he'd already lost. I paid it. Quietly, every invoice, through a billing address that wasn't mine. So no one would ask. I held my mother's hand the night she died. And she knew, even if no one else did, which of her family had counted, and which one had stayed. Years later, my uncle would stand at that table and say I didn't understand what family meant. He had no idea he was talking about the woman who'd let his sister die with dignity. Jackson worked the crowd like a campaign. I watched him steer Carlos Ramirez and 2 of the cousins on a slow lap of the property, pointing at the barn, the new fence line, the back pasture where the cattle grazed. He talked about it all with easy confidence. When Uncle Ray's ready to step back, we've got plans, bring the whole operation into the next century. Natalie walked beside him, arm linked through his, nodding at every word. There's a rhythm to a man laying groundwork. I've sat across the desk from enough of them to recognize it. You don't talk about when Uncle Ray steps back unless you've already started moving pieces. I drifted closer, refilled my tea. Jackson was telling a cousin the paperwork was almost done. Just a few more signatures, getting it all locked in so there's no confusion later. No confusion. People who plan to inherit a ranch honestly don't talk like that. They talk about hay prices, drought, whether to sell the heifers in spring. The word that stuck in my mind was almost. Almost done. A few signatures left. A man in a hurry to get signatures is a man afraid of what happens if he waits. I set down my glass. And for the first time all day, I stopped thinking about how it felt to be there. I started paying attention. Let me explain how I ended up qualified to quietly dismantle my own family's collapse. When my mother got sick, I was 4 years into my practice, barely scraping by, doing tax prep for small ranchers and the woman who owned the feed store. But farm clients teach you things. You learn how a place can be worth $1 million on paper and still go under because there's no cash in March. You learn what a charge-off is, what a lien is, how a deed actually transfers in the state. I learned it all because my clients lived and died by it. And because somewhere in the back of my mind, I already knew my own family was standing on the same edge. By the time I saw that final notice, I wasn't a scared niece anymore. I was a professional who understood exactly what that red ink meant. And exactly how much time was left before a bank turns a family ranch into a line item at auction. The week after I saw that notice, I went to see Philip Corder. Philip's been doing estate law in Ashford County for 30 years, old, methodical, the kind of lawyer who still uses a fountain pen. He knew my grandfather, he'd drawn up my mother's will. If anyone could tell me what was really happening to the ranch, it was Philip. I sat across his desk and asked him straight. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then he told me. The mortgage had gone into default, the bank had already charged off the loan and packaged it for sale. The ranch was 8 weeks from auction. And my uncle had told no one. Not Jackson, not Diane, not a soul. He would rather lose 3 generations of Callaway land in silence than admit he couldn't hold it. I sat with that. The clock on Philip's wall ticked. Then I asked him the question that changed everything. Philip, if the bank's already written off the note, can someone else buy it? He went very still. Put his glasses back on, looked at me over the frames. Yes, it's legal, it's quiet, and if it's structured right, the bank doesn't care who pays. He paused. Claire, are you asking me what I think you're asking me? I didn't answer right away. I was already doing the math. I want you to understand what it cost. I had spent 12 years building something worth protecting. I had a retirement account I'd been contributing to since I was 23. I had a small office building with just enough equity to borrow against. To buy that note, I borrowed against the office, drained most of the retirement, emptied the savings account I'd kept for emergencies. I sat in Philip's office and signed my own security away. To catch a falling house. That the people inside would never know was caught. We did it cleanly. Philip set up a trust to hold the note, put the lien in the trust's name. On paper, the trust simply became the lender. And I put the loan into forbearance. No payments, no collections, no auction. My uncle would go on living there exactly as he always had. The bank got paid, walked away happy. And the auction that was 2 months from destroying my family simply never happened. As far as the world was concerned, Ray Calloway had handled it. And I let him believe it. Because the alternative was walking into that house and saying I saved you. And watching his face turn to ash. Being saved by the cold one would have been worse than losing the land. So I told no one. I drove home that night a great deal poorer. Carrying a secret heavier than the debt itself. I did it for a reason I hadn't said out loud yet. The reason was in the lockbox. Back at the party, the noise rose and fell. Someone cranked the ice cream maker, kids ran through the sprinklers. My uncle held court, Jackson kept the drinks cold. The whole machine ran without me. The way it always did. I slipped away. Walked across the yard to my mother's mesquite tree, sat down on the iron bench my uncle swore he'd repaint every spring and never did. From there I could see the whole gathering. At a distance. Like something happening to someone else. I took the lockbox out of my bag. It was small, dented, the kind you keep documents in. My mother had kept it in the bottom drawer of her dresser under a quilt. After she died, my uncle couldn't go through her things. So the job fell to me. Inside the box was a letter. My name on the front, her handwriting. I'd read it once, the night I found it. Then I'd put it away and carried it for 18 months without reading it again. Because some letters you can only survive once. But I'd brought it back today. I needed to read it here, in the shade of her tree. Before I did what I came to do. I opened the box. The paper had gone soft. My mother's voice came up off the page like she was sitting beside me. Claire. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, so I'll say it plain. I know about the ranch, I know it's in trouble, I've known longer than your uncle thinks. I've watched him hide the notices, I've watched him lean on Jackson. And I know how this ends if somebody doesn't step in. She wrote about marrying into that land at 20, learning to love it for what it asked of her. Then she wrote the part I'd been carrying. Your uncle is going to lose this place, and his pride won't let him take help from the one person strong enough to give it. That's you, Claire. It was always you. You're the one who can carry a thing in the dark and not need anyone to see it. So I'm asking you to do something hard. Save it if you can. Do it quietly. Let him keep his pride, even when he doesn't deserve it. Because the land isn't for him. It's for the ones who come after. And then the line. He'll never thank you. Do it anyway. You've always been the strong one, Claire. That's why it has to be you. I sat under her tree and read it twice. The second time, my eyes stayed dry. Which would have surprised her. She always said I cried at the wrong things. I folded the letter, put it back in the box. He'll never thank you, do it anyway. 18 months I'd done it anyway. And across the yard, the man I'd done it for was about to stand up and tell everyone I didn't understand what family meant. I almost laughed. Not a kind laugh. The kind you let out so it doesn't turn into something else. My mother had asked me to be the root nobody sees. And I had been. I would have gone on being it, probably until he died. That was the plan. Catch the house, hold it quietly, pass it to the next generation, never say a word. I'd made peace with being the outsider. If it meant the land stayed in the family, I could carry it. But peace depends on everyone playing their part. I could be the silent root. What I couldn't do, what I wouldn't do, was stand by and watch someone take the very thing I'd bled to protect and try to sell it. And that, I didn't know yet, was exactly what Jackson was doing. I came back toward the crowd. That's when I saw it. Jackson had pulled my uncle aside, around the corner of the house, near the propane tank. Where people go to talk without being heard. I stopped. Invisible. The way I'd been invisible all day. Jackson had a folder. He opened it against the side of the house, held out a pen. Just here, Uncle Ray, and here, where the tabs are, so it's all buttoned up and nobody can come at us later. My uncle patted his shirt for his reading glasses, didn't find them. Squinted at the page. That's a lot of fine print, son. Jackson smiled. Smooth. Just formalities, protects the property, you trust me, don't you? There it was. The question Jackson had been asking our uncle his whole life. The one that wasn't really a question. My uncle took the pen. But before he signed, the breeze caught the folder. Lifted the cover just enough. I saw the logo printed in the corner. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't Philip's firm. It was a name I knew from my own work. A real estate group 2 counties over. They don't protect land. They move it. My uncle set the pen to paper. And I heard my own voice. Louder than I meant. Uncle Ray, wait. He looked up, annoyed. Jackson closed the folder. Fast. This is family business, Claire. The old line. The one that had kept me out of every room that mattered. My uncle's jaw set. "We'll finish this inside." And just like that, the moment was gone. I stood there, plate in hand, but moments like that leave a wake. A few minutes later I was near the drink table. Natalie and Aunt Diane had their heads together. Not as quiet as they thought. Natalie was glowing. "Once it's all signed over, Jackson says we'll finally get what we're owed." Aunt Diane patted her hand. "It's about time somebody in this family was practical. Signed over. Not inherited. Not someday. Now." With a real estate company's logo on the paperwork. And a man in a hurry. I'd been collecting pieces all afternoon. Right there at the drink table, they snapped together. My cousin wasn't securing the ranch for the next generation. He was getting my uncle to sign it into his control. So he could sell it. Get what we're owed. I set down my plate. I needed to see those papers. I waited for my chance. It came when someone brought out the cake. The whole crowd drifted toward the table. Even Jackson, even my uncle. I told a cousin I needed the restroom. Went in through the side door. Into the cool quiet of the house I used to know. The folder was on the kitchen counter. Next to my uncle's glasses, his truck keys. I'm not proud of what I did next. But I'm not sorry either. I opened it. The top page was exactly what I feared. A listing agreement. Pre-filled, ready to sign. Naming the ranch, the 112 acres, the barn, all of it. The asking price was printed near the top. Low. The kind of low you set when you want a fast sale and don't care what it's worth. But that wasn't the part that stopped my breath. The seller's signature line didn't say Ray Calloway. It said Jackson Morrow, attorney in fact. I stood in my mother's kitchen. And understood. Jackson had already gotten my uncle to sign a power of attorney. Probably months ago. Dressed up as protects the property. Now he was using it to list the ranch under his own authority. The signatures he needed today weren't to protect anything. They were the last pieces that let him close. My uncle thought he was securing a legacy. He was signing away the right to stop his nephew from selling his home. I pulled out my phone. Photographed every page. The listing, the price, Jackson's name on the seller line. Then I closed the folder exactly as I found it. My hands were steady. They're always steady. That's the thing nobody ever gave me credit for. I didn't confront anyone. That's the mistake they expected. The scene, the tears, the accusation no one believes. I'm not built that way. I went back out, ate a polite slice of cake. Then I stepped behind the barn where I had cell signal. And I called Philip Corder at home. He answered with his grandkids in the background. I told him what I'd seen. The folder, the real estate company, the listing signed by Jackson under power of attorney. Philip stopped talking. Asked me 3 questions. The date on the agreement, the brokerage name, whether the price was listed. I answered all 3. Long silence. Then Philip said what I already knew. "Claire, if he's got valid POA and he finds a buyer, your uncle could lose that ranch in 60 days, and there's not much Ray could do to stop it once the paperwork's moving." He paused. "Especially if Ray doesn't even know what he signed." I leaned against the barn. Looked out at the green pasture, the hills, the mesquite tree. 60 days. Jackson had built a quiet, patient machine. And it was already running. He'd thought of everything. Everything except one thing. The ranch couldn't be sold without going through me first. Let me slow down here. Because this is the hinge. Jackson had spent months working my uncle, gathering signatures, lining up buyers. Building a power of attorney into a key that would let him sell the family ranch. It was a good plan. Patient, ruthless. Exactly the kind of thing he'd always been better at than honest work. But every plan rests on an assumption. And Jackson's plan rested on one that had been false for 18 months. He believed the ranch could be sold free and clear. It couldn't. When I bought that charged-off note and folded it into the trust, the bank's claim became mine. The lien, for the full value of the property, now named my trust. My uncle still held title. But that title carried a lien for everything it was worth. And the lien holder was me. Picture it. Jackson standing in the yard, getting signatures to sell a house. And the house was already, quietly, legally, beyond his power to sell. A power of attorney lets you act for the person who granted it. It does not let you hand a buyer clean title when a lien sits in someone else's hands. Jackson had built a beautiful key. And fitted it into a lock that opened nothing. So I had a choice. I could do nothing. Let Jackson's scheme collapse on its own when the title search came back. The buyer would walk. Jackson would have to explain why he tried to sell property he didn't control. My uncle would never even know how close he came. And I could go on being the silent route. Holding the land in the dark, letting them call me whatever kept the peace. That was the safe path. But I sat on an overturned crate behind the barn. And I thought about my mother's letter. He'll never thank you, do it anyway. She'd asked me to protect the land. She had not asked me to protect the lie. There's a difference. And it took me 18 months to feel it. Protecting the land had cost me money and pride. But protecting the lie, year after year, had cost me my name. It had let Jackson keep being the golden boy while he tried to rob everyone. And it had let my uncle believe, every single day, that the niece who saved him was the one who failed him. My mother asked me to let him keep his pride. Even when he didn't deserve it. But a man who'll sell the legacy he's bragging about doesn't deserve the truth kept from the people he's lying to. I made my decision. Not revenge. Daylight. I came back around the barn. Caught my uncle by the dessert table, away from Jackson. Kept my voice low. Uncle Ray, before you sign anything else today, will you let me read it? Just read it, 5 minutes. For a second, something flickered. And I let myself hope. Then Jackson appeared at his elbow. And my uncle's face hardened. Whatever door had cracked, it swung shut. He looked at me. In front of Carlos Ramirez, in front of the cousins, in front of Aunt Diane. And he said it. Loud enough for everyone. You lost the right to worry about this family the day you let your mother die alone. The words landed like a slap. Carlos looked at his boots. Natalie smiled into her cup. Aunt Diane nodded. Jackson looked at me with something close to pity. And I stood there. In the late golden light. With 3 years of being the outsider pressing on my shoulders. And I understood. There was no quiet way left. I have spent my whole life being told I'm cold. So I let myself be exactly as cold as the moment required. Which is to say, perfectly, professionally clear. I didn't make a scene. I left early. Before the speeches. Nobody noticed. I drove the 43 miles back to Rosewood with the windows down. My mother's letter on the seat beside me. By the time I reached my office, the sun was low and my mind was clear. I let myself in, turned on one lamp. And printed 3 documents. The first was the recorded deed of trust, public record, showing the ranch held in my trust, dated 18 months back, stamped by the county clerk. The second was the bank's payoff letter. Proof that the debt that nearly took the ranch had been paid in full. By me. The spring my uncle told the neighbors he'd handled it himself. The third was a copy of the listing agreement. Jackson's signature at the bottom, by power of attorney. The asking price printed low and ugly across the top. 3 pieces of paper. The whole truth in black and white. The only language this family had never let me speak. I didn't add a single word. No accusation, no letter. The paper said it all. I squared the edges. Slid them into a manila envelope. Wrote one line on the front. Small, neat. Happy Memorial Day. Then I turned off the lamp. And went home. I almost didn't go back. I sat at my kitchen table that evening. The envelope in front of me. And I let myself feel the size of what it would do. Once those papers were out, there was no taking them back. My uncle would know, in front of everyone, that the cold one had held his house in her hands for 18 months. Jackson would be finished. The clean story they all told themselves would shatter. And they would never be able to put it back the way it was. Part of me wanted to protect them. Even then. That's the part my mother knew. The root that grows in the dark and asks for nothing. But I read her letter one more time. And I let the last line settle where it belonged. He'll never thank you, do it anyway. She wrote that about saving the land. But I understood now that doing it anyway meant the hard whole of it. Not just the easy quiet part. It meant letting the truth sit down at the table. Even when the truth would cost me the last thread of belonging I had. I wasn't going back to humiliate my uncle. I was going back because a lie had worn my name for 3 years. And I was done lending it out. I checked the time. The party would be winding down. The neighbors still lingering. The perfect audience for the only kind of reckoning I've ever believed in. The kind where you simply stop letting people lie about you. And let the paperwork do the rest. I picked up the envelope. And my keys. It was nearly dusk when I came back up the gravel drive. The cars had thinned. But the core was still there. Family at the long table, the Ramirez family leaning on the fence, citronella candles just lit. The light had gone that deep summer gold that makes everything look like a memory while it's still happening. I parked at the far end. The way I always did. And walked up through the clearing. The envelope in my hand. Conversations dipped as I passed. Jackson saw me first. Something tightened in his face. A flash of the boy who used to check whether I'd seen him take the last piece of pie. He didn't know what I knew. But men like Jackson always feel the weather change. At the head of the table, my uncle was telling a story. And Jackson, recovering, lifted his glass. "Hey, before everyone heads out, somebody should say something for Uncle Ray." Murmurs of agreement. My uncle waved it off. Then stood. Tall, gray, beloved. I stopped a few feet from the table. Held the envelope down at my side. And waited. My uncle lifted his glass. Looked around at the family, the land, the golden evening. "I've been blessed," he said. And his voice carried. 3 generations on this ground. He started naming them. His blessings. He nodded at Jackson first, and longest. "My nephew, who stayed, who's worked this land beside me." Natalie got a nod. "The cousins." Aunt Diane pressed her hand to her chest. "He was proud," he said. "Of all his family." Then his eyes found me. And the warmth drained out of his face. The table followed his gaze. "Proud of all my family," he said again. Slower now. Making sure the neighbors heard. Except the one who never understood what any of it meant. The words hung in the air. Someone's fork stopped. Carlos looked away. Natalie smiled. Jackson looked at me with something like pity. And I stood there. In the last light. With 3 years of silence pressing on my shoulders. I understood. There was no gentle way left. So I let myself be exactly what the moment required. Cold. Clear. Calm. I stepped up to the table. Into the candlelight. Close enough that he had to look at me. And I set the envelope down beside his plate. Square, quiet. The way you set down a thing that's already decided. His eyes dropped to the line on the front. "Happy Memorial Day." Then back up to mine. Narrow, suspicious. "What is this?" Not a question. A warning. I kept my voice low. The voice I use when a client's about to learn something hard. "Happy Memorial Day, Uncle Ray. Open it when you're ready." That was all. No accusation, no speech. 3 years of it. And I spent fewer words on him than he'd just spent on me. I looked around the table. At Jackson, at Natalie, at Diane, at the Ramirez family frozen at the fence. And I let them all see that I was perfectly, completely calm. Then I turned. And walked back toward my car. Behind me, I heard my uncle pick up the envelope. I heard the paper tear. I didn't turn around. Some things you don't need to watch to know they've landed. The walk to my truck felt a mile long. Behind me, the patio had gone quiet. The particular kind of quiet a crowd goes when it can't tell yet whether to be embarrassed or afraid. I heard Jackson's voice, pitched loud for the neighbors. "Don't worry about it, Uncle Ray, she's just being dramatic, you know how she gets. Throw it out." But my uncle didn't throw it out. I could feel it. The way you feel a storm change direction. There's a silence a man makes when he's reading something that doesn't match the story in his head. And it was pouring off that patio now. Thick as smoke. I reached my truck. Put my hand on the door. Made myself stop. Just for a second. In the last of the light. I thought about my mother. Under her tree. The night she died. The invoices nobody ever saw. I thought. This is for you. And I wasn't sure if I meant her. Or the girl I used to be. The one who brought a folder to a deathbed and got told the family needed faith instead. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of an envelope being ripped the rest of the way open. The rustle of pages coming out. I heard my uncle draw a breath. And then, across the whole golden evening, I heard that breath catch in his throat. I opened my door. The screaming was about to start. My uncle read the first page, then the second, then the third. And the whole party watched the color leave his face. The first page was the deed of trust. Filed with the county, 18 months back. The lien on the ranch assigned to my trust. My name as trustee. The second was the bank's payoff letter. Proof that the debt that should have taken the ranch had been paid in full. By me. The spring he told these same neighbors he'd handled it himself. The third was the listing agreement. Jackson's signature at the bottom. By power of attorney. The asking price printed low across the top. The machine that had been quietly selling the ranch right out from under the man making the toast. He understood it all in one terrible rush. The cold one had saved the ranch. The golden boy had been trying to sell it. The legacy he'd promised the neighbors hadn't been his for 18 months. And the only thing standing between it and the auctioneer had been her. My uncle came up out of his chair so fast it went over backward. "Jackson," he said. And his voice cracked clean down the middle. "What is this? What did you do?" Jackson was already on his feet. "Hands up." The easy charm gone gray. "Uncle Ray, that's not," she's twisting it. But my uncle wasn't listening. He was turning the pages over in his shaking hands. And then he was roaring. No words. Just sound. The sound of a proud man watching every story he told about himself come apart at once. The Ramirez family came off the fence. Down the road, porch lights snapped on. Neighbors stepping out to see what was tearing the evening open. I was in my truck. Window down. Engine running. When my uncle finally found words again. And screamed my name across the yard. Not the cold one. My name. Claire. I started the engine. And said the only thing I had left to say. Quiet. Through the open window. Into the chaos. "I didn't come to take anything, Uncle Ray. I came to give it back. It was always going to be yours. I just made sure no one could take it from you. Including him. I didn't stay to watch it burn. That's the difference between me and the people at that table. They needed an audience for everything. Their pride, their grief, their cruelty. I didn't need one for my justice. But I saw enough in the rear view." Jackson backing away from the table, hands still up, talking fast. And no one looking at him the way they used to. Natalie stepping away from her husband. Actual space between them now. The first crack in a marriage built on what we're owed. Aunt Diane sitting with her mouth open. For once in 74 years, nothing to say. And my uncle. Sitting back down in the chair someone had righted. The papers loose in his lap. Staring at the deed with my name on it. Like it was written in a language he was only now learning to read. The neighbors stood at their fences. Everyone who'd heard him say I didn't understand family was now hearing the rest of it. And there's no silence big enough to hide this. I turned out of the driveway. Onto the 2-lane road. Rolled up the window. The screaming faded behind me. I drove the 43 miles home with the radio off. My mother's letter on the seat beside me. And somewhere around the county line, I realized my hands weren't steady anymore. For the first time in 18 months. They were shaking. I let them. I'd earned the right. The listing came down within the week. A title search would have killed it anyway. But Philip made one call to the brokerage and it vanished. Like it had never been. Jackson had a harder week. The creditors he'd been planning to pay with the sale didn't disappear just because his plan did. And without the ranch to leverage, he had nothing left to wave at them. Natalie took the kids to her sister's place in San Marcos. Last I heard, she hadn't come back. The golden boy turned out to be just a man who owed money and lied about it. And a small county does not forget that quickly. Philip and I finished the work I'd started 18 months before. This time my uncle signed willingly. Eyes open. We folded the ranch into a proper family trust. The kind built to outlive all of us. My uncle gets to live there the rest of his days. Exactly as he always has. Every acre, every board. But it can never be sold out from under the family again. Not by Jackson. Not by anyone. Because the terms don't allow it. And the trustee won't sign it. The trustee is still me. My uncle called 11 days after Memorial Day. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he didn't apologize. Not really. My uncle doesn't have the equipment for it. But he said my name. Claire. Not the other word. And he asked, in a voice I'd never heard him use, why I never told him. I said, "You wouldn't have let me help if you'd known it was me." He was quiet a long time. Because we both knew it was true. Then he asked if I'd come out to the ranch again sometime. And here's where I drew the line my mother never got to draw. I'll keep the roof over your head, Uncle Ray, for her, for the land, for the people who come after. But I won't keep standing in a room that calls me cold. Those are two different things. And you don't get one without the other anymore. He didn't argue. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't argue. I've thought a lot since that night about what my mother asked of me. And about the part of her letter I only understood too late. Being the strong one doesn't mean you owe people your silence forever. And sometimes the kindest thing and the strongest thing are the same thing. Which is to finally let the truth sit down at the table. And stay. That's where I'll leave it. One envelope. One quiet drive home. One family that finally knows who held the roof up all along. If you've ever been called cold by people who never once saw what you carried in the dark, tell me about it in the comments. Because I read them. And you are not the cold one in your story. I'll see you at the next table.